Pack your things. You have 10 minutes. The words landed like a slap in the quiet afternoon air. Edward Kingsley stood in the doorway of the music room, his hand gripping the frame as if holding back an anger too large for the space. Behind him, sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Maya Thompson froze, her fingers still resting on the piano keys. Beside her, 6-year-old Clara looked up, her blue eyes wide, a faint smile fading from her lips. Moments ago, they had been singing together, Clara's clear, bright voice filling the room in a way Maya had never dared to hope for so soon. Now, the fragile magic was gone, replaced by a tension so sharp it seemed to hum in the air. "What did you say?" Maya's voice was quiet but steady. "You heard me." Edward's tone was clipped, his gaze fixed on Maya with the precision of someone used to ending conversations, not having them. "Gather your belongings and leave this house immediately." Clara's small hand found the fabric of Maya's sleeve, clutching tightly. "No," she whispered, a word Maya had never heard her say aloud. Edward's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder, Clara. This performance ends now." Performance? The words stung. Maya had been hired to care for a child everyone said barely spoke at all. For 2 years, Clara had met every therapist, every specialist, with a silence so complete it was treated as a diagnosis carved in stone. And yet, in just 8 weeks, Clara had begun to sing, to laugh, to tell stories when no one else was around. Now, instead of joy, Maya saw only fear in the child's eyes. The clock on the wall ticked, loud and unyielding. 10 minutes. That was all Edward was willing to give, to erase whatever had just happened in this room. Maya straightened slowly, her palm brushing over Clara's hair in a silent promise. She didn't argue. Not yet. Some battles, she knew, were won long before the other side realized a war had begun. Outside the music room, the mansion carried the same air it always did. Quiet, orderly, immaculate. The garden fountains bubbled softly, the trimmed hedges stood in perfect lines, and the marble floors gleamed under the late afternoon light. To a passerby, it was the picture of harmony. Inside, though, the Kingsley estate held a different reality, one made of rules that weren't written down, but were enforced without mercy. Maya had learned those rules quickly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't offer opinions on Clara's care unless directly asked. And, above all, never contradict Edward Kingsley in his own house. Edward was a man who'd built his fortune in real estate before turning 40, the kind of person whose presence filled a room before he spoke. Tall, impeccably dressed, his salt and pepper hair always in place, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. His business instincts were sharp, but his patience for imperfection, especially in his own family, was almost non-existent. Clara was his only child, a little girl with porcelain skin and the kind of blue eyes that made strangers smile. At 3, she had been diagnosed with selective mutism. The specialists, some of the most expensive in the country, had told Edward she might never speak in normal settings again. Since then, Clara had grown into a silent shadow in her own home, trailing behind nannies who never stayed longer than a few weeks. Edward treated the diagnosis like an unfortunate blemish on an otherwise perfect life. Public events, Clara stayed home. Family gatherings, short visits, carefully managed so no one asked uncomfortable questions. By the time Maya arrived, she knew she was walking into a job that came with expectations and limits. What Edward didn't know was that she carried a quiet determination of her own. With a degree in child psychology and years of experience working with children others had written off, Maya had seen what patience and genuine attention could do. She also knew better than to share her credentials during the interview. Men like Edward tended to hire people who wouldn't challenge them. Her first day at the mansion had been like stepping into a perfectly staged photograph. Every detail, from the scent of imported coffee drifting from the kitchen to the faint hum of the central air, spoke of wealth. But wealth didn't always mean warmth. The staff moved like clockwork, their footsteps soft, their eyes lowered. It didn't take long for Maya to realize that most conversations here happened in hushed tones, if they happened at all. Then there was Clara. The little girl had greeted her not with words, but with a long, searching look. It was the kind of gaze that seemed to measure a person in ways adults couldn't. Over the next few days, Maya noticed patterns. How Clara's eyes would light up at the side of a piano, how her fingers traced the spines of books in the library, how she sometimes mouthed words when she thought no one was watching. Still, there was a wall between Clara and the rest of the household, and it wasn't just made of silence. Edward's interactions with her were brief, efficient, almost transactional. Eat your breakfast. Time for your appointment. Go to your room. There were no lingering questions, no pauses to hear what she might say back, if she ever did. The breakthrough had come unexpectedly, 2 weeks into Maya's time there. A rainy afternoon, the two of them alone in the music room. Maya had played a simple melody, nothing demanding, just enough to fill the space. She hummed the tune, and after a moment, she heard something so soft she almost thought she imagined it. Clara humming along. By the end of the week, humming had turned into singing, singing into short phrases, and short phrases into full conversations, at least when no one else was around. Maya had kept it between them, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she knew Edward would find a way to dismiss it. He believed what the doctors had told him, and anything that didn't fit into that belief was, to him, an illusion or a trick. What made it worse was the way he spoke about Clara when she wasn't in the room. "She's limited," he'd say to visitors with a tight smile. "We do what we can." The words weren't cruel in tone, but they carried a weight that sank deep. Clara might not have responded, but Maya could see she understood. Children often did, even when adults thought they didn't. And then came the moment in the music room. The moment Edward had walked in, heard the impossible, and decided it couldn't be real. That's why he'd told her to leave. It wasn't just that Maya had broken the rules. It was that she'd shown him a truth he wasn't ready to see. As Maya stood in the hallway now, Clara still clutching her sleeve, she knew this wasn't over. Edward could tell her to pack her things. He could hire someone else, someone who followed the rules to the letter. But once a door like this had opened, it didn't close so easily. That night, the house seemed to breathe differently. The staff moved quietly, as if avoiding invisible tripwires. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall felt louder, more insistent. Edward had made his point in the music room. He believed that was the end of it. An employee dismissed, an inconvenient situation contained. But Maya could feel the current shifting beneath the polished surface. Clara had crossed a line simply by speaking in front of her father, and Edward wasn't the type to let that go without tightening his grip. The next morning, Maya arrived in the kitchen to find the schedule had been rearranged without her input. Clara's daily piano practice was gone, replaced with an extra therapy session. "Dr. Langford is available at 11, Edward said casually over coffee, as though the change was a minor adjustment. Maya met his gaze. Clara had been making real progress with music. Edward's expression didn't change. Progress is for professionals to measure, not caretakers. He didn't raise his voice, but the dismissal was clear. The therapy session was long and clinical. Clara sat in the corner, her shoulders tense, her gaze fixed on the carpet. The therapist asked questions, all met with silence. Maya kept her own face neutral, though inside she felt a knot tightening. She had seen Clara's mind work, how she could connect ideas, solve puzzles, remember entire melodies after hearing them once. But here, in this setting, Clara became the quiet shadow again. Over the next week, the tension grew. Edward's comments became sharper, not in volume, but in precision. "You're filling her head with unrealistic expectations," he said one afternoon, finding Maya and Clara drawing maps of imaginary cities. "She doesn't need distractions. She needs structure." Maya didn't argue, not directly. Instead, she asked Clara about her city later that evening, and the little girl described bridges, rivers, and districts with names in 3 different languages. It was the kind of detail no one would expect from a 6-year-old. Edward noticed the bond between them, and his tactics shifted. A second nanny appeared during the afternoons to assist. Her name was Monica, from a well-known agency. She was polite enough, but her presence changed the dynamic. Clara grew quieter when Monica was in the room, and the time Maya had with her was cut in half. One evening, after Maya had left, Clara slipped a folded piece of paper into Maya's hand. In neat block letters, it read, "Don't let him make you go." Maya kept the note. It was small, but it was a declaration, a line drawn in the quiet. Edward's next move was less subtle. In the middle of the week, he entered the library while Maya and Clara were reading. "We'll be leaving for a dinner event in an hour," he announced. "Maya, you're not needed tonight. Monica will stay with Clara." Clara's eyes widened. She didn't say anything, but she moved closer to Maya, her hand brushing against hers. Edward noticed, and his jaw tightened. "Clara," he said evenly, "you'll be fine." The unspoken message was clear. Control was his, and he intended to keep it. But Maya understood something Edward didn't. Every time he tried to distance them, Clara's attachment grew stronger. And every moment Clara saw Maya stand calmly against his decisions, even in silence, she learned something about resilience. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. Maya had arranged a quiet activity in the garden, teaching Clara how to press flowers between the pages of a book. The sun was warm, the air carrying the scent of roses. Clara was speaking softly, describing each flower's color and shape when Edward appeared at the edge of the patio. "This is over," he said simply. "From Monday, your contract will be terminated. Monica will take over full-time." Clara froze. "No," she whispered, louder this time. Edward glanced at her, then back at Maya. "You've been here long enough to know I make decisions for my daughter's best interest." Maya rose slowly, closing the book in her hands. "Are you sure that's what this is?" she asked quietly. For the first time, something flickered in Edward's expression, not doubt exactly, but irritation at being questioned. He turned away without answering, leaving the air between them charged and unsettled. Maya turned the pressed flower book over in her hands, its weight oddly comforting. On the desk, her journals sat in a careful stack, each one filled with notes, sketches, and transcriptions of moments no one else in the Kingsley household had witnessed. In another home, these might have been keepsakes. Here, they were evidence. She glanced at the clock. 7:15. If she left now, she could just make it across town. An hour later, she was sitting in a warm, book-lined office, sunlight fading through tall windows. Across from her, Dr. Helen Morris adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages Maya had laid out. Helen had been Maya's mentor during her graduate studies in child psychology, a woman whose reputation in developmental research carried weight in both academic and legal circles. "This is remarkable," Helen said at last, looking up. "Clara's linguistic range alone is far beyond her age group. And this," she tapped a page filled with notations from one of their piano sessions, "this is advanced pattern recognition. She's not just talented, Maya, she's gifted." "I know," Maya said quietly, "but her father, he won't hear it. If it doesn't fit what the specialists told him 3 years ago, it's not real." Helen leaned back, fingers steepled. "Then you need more than academic validation. You need someone who can make him listen or force him to." That was when she mentioned Thomas Rivera, an attorney known for advocating in high-profile children's rights cases. "He's meticulous, and he doesn't take cases unless he believes in them. I'll call him tonight." 2 days later, Maya found herself at a small cafe, a manila folder on the table between her and Thomas. The attorney flipped through photographs of Clara's drawings, audio transcriptions of their conversations, and a USB drive containing recordings. His brow furrowed as he read, then he looked up. "You've been documenting all of this since you arrived?"
"Yes," Maya replied. "I didn't start out intending to build a case, but once I saw how much she was holding back and why, I couldn't ignore it." Thomas nodded slowly. "If this is as solid as it looks, we're not just talking about proving her abilities, we're talking about showing how the current environment is limiting her. That has legal weight." Maya hesitated. "I don't want to take her away from her father. I just want him to see her for who she really is." "That," Thomas said, "might be harder than going to court."
The next evening, back at the mansion, Maya returned to her usual routine. To Edward, it looked as though she'd accepted her impending dismissal. But in the quiet moments, during Clara's reading time, at the piano, in whispered conversations as they worked on puzzles, Maya was gathering more. Not just proof of Clara's skills, but the way her confidence bloomed when she was heard. The shift was subtle at first. Clara began to ask questions in a low voice when Monica was in the room, as though testing the edges of her own courage. She left little notes under Maya's door, facts she'd learned, songs she'd remembered, even a drawing of the two of them standing side by side. Every page, every note, every recording went into the growing archive Maya now kept in a locked bag under her bed. Edward had no idea that while he was tightening his control, Maya was preparing to pull the foundation out from under it. And now, with Helen and Thomas in the loop, she wasn't alone anymore. The email arrived on a Thursday evening. Maya read it twice before the words sank in. "Conference on Gifted Child Development, Boston University, Saturday at 3 p.m. Guest presentation, Hidden Potential in Overlooked Children." Helen's message underneath was simple: bring everything. By Saturday morning, the manila folder had grown heavier than its size should allow. Inside were weeks of careful records, drawings, transcriptions, and audio clips. Thomas had spent hours reviewing the contents, selecting the most undeniable pieces, moments no reasonable person could dismiss. The conference hall was already buzzing when Maya arrived. Rows of chairs faced a stage framed by soft lighting. Behind the podium, a large screen displayed the title of the session in clean, bold letters. The audience was a mix of educators, psychologists, and parents. Cameras from a local news crew were set up along one side of the room. Maya took her seat in the front row beside Helen, her pulse steady but her thoughts sharp. Edward had been sent an official invitation earlier in the week. Thomas had insisted on it. If he came, he would see everything. If he didn't, he would hear about it soon enough. Minutes before the presentation began, a familiar figure appeared at the back of the hall. Edward Kingsley, immaculate in a tailored navy suit, scanned the room until his eyes landed on Maya. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't turn around. He found a seat halfway back, arms crossed. Helen stepped up to the podium. Her voice was calm, measured. "Today, we'll explore how family perceptions can sometimes mask extraordinary abilities in children. Our case study involves a 6-year-old girl whose potential was nearly hidden by the very environment meant to nurture her." On the screen behind her, a photo appeared. Clara, sitting at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The image was candid, her face lit by quiet concentration. Helen gestured to Maya. With permission from the child's guardian and the assistance of her primary caretaker during the observation period, we documented a series of interactions. What you're about to hear may challenge your assumptions. The first audio clip began. Clara's voice, clear, confident, singing in perfect Italian. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. The next clip was her explaining the rules of a game she had invented, switching fluently between English and French. Then came the recording of her reading aloud, from a book well beyond her age level, pausing to define words.
Edward shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on the floor. Helen continued. These abilities were not the result of sudden instruction. They had been there all along, but only emerged when the child felt safe and understood. The next slide appeared. Excerpts from emails. The text was projected large enough for everyone to read. Maintain current diagnosis. Avoid activities that might raise expectations. Public appearances not advised. Maya didn't look at Edward, but she felt the tension in the room sharpen. Helen's voice didn't accuse, it simply stated facts. This correspondence illustrates how certain decisions, even made with perceived good intentions, can inadvertently limit a child's growth. A hand went up in the audience. Why would a parent ask for that? Helen answered carefully. Sometimes fear of disappointment leads to lowering expectations. Unfortunately, this can also lower opportunities. The final clip played. Clara's voice again, softer this time. When I pretend I can't do things, Daddy spends more time with me. If I show him I can, he leaves. The room went silent. Helen closed the presentation. Children don't need perfection from us. They need belief, and they need us to see them for who they are, not who we expect them to be. When she stepped away from the podium, Maya stood. She didn't speak to the room. She spoke directly to Edward, her voice steady enough for the microphones to catch. Clara isn't a project. She's a person. She doesn't need fixing. She needs her father to see her. For a moment, the air seemed to hold still. Edward looked at her, and for the first time in their months of clashing, he didn't speak. Thomas stepped forward then, addressing the audience. The outcome of this case is still developing, but what's clear is that this little girl has extraordinary abilities that will now be nurtured in an environment designed to help her thrive. Applause began slowly, then built. Maya felt it pass through her, not as a victory for herself, but as a shield forming around Clara. Edward remained seated until the applause faded. When he finally rose, it was with a stiffness that spoke of more than just discomfort. It was the weight of seeing something he could no longer deny. He walked past Maya on his way out, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "What do you want from me?" Maya met his eyes. To be the father she already believes you can be. By Monday morning, the ripple from the conference had grown into a wave. Articles appeared online, some quoting Helen's presentation, others sharing snippets of Clara's recordings. The story was no longer confined to a lecture hall. It was making its way into living rooms, staff meetings, and coffee shop conversations. For Edward, there was no ignoring it. The Department of Child Services contacted him with a formal plan. Clara would remain in his custody, but under a monitored arrangement. A child development specialist, appointed by the court, would oversee her progress for the next year. And, to his visible discomfort, Maya was named as her official educational tutor. At first, Edward resisted, but resistance had become a losing strategy. The facts were too public, the attention too focused. Slowly, he began to attend the weekly sessions Helen hosted at the university, sitting in the back at first, silent, watching Clara interact with other children.
The change was gradual, almost reluctant. He didn't suddenly become the warm, attentive father Clara deserved, but there were moments, small ones, that hinted at something shifting. He stayed longer after lessons. He asked questions about the books she was reading. Once, he even joined her at the piano, awkwardly pressing a few keys before giving up with a quiet laugh. For Maya, the work continued. The afternoons were filled with music, reading, and projects that spilled across the dining room table. Clara thrived in the structure Maya built, a structure designed not to limit, but to invite exploration. Her vocabulary expanded, her confidence grew, and her laughter became a regular sound in the house. Helen visited often, bringing new materials and noting each milestone. Thomas checked in less frequently, satisfied that the legal protections were holding. The household staff noticed the difference too. Clara was no longer the silent figure moving like a shadow through the halls. She had become a presence, still thoughtful, still quiet at times, but undeniably present. One evening, months after the conference, Maya stood by the garden watching Clara run across the lawn, her hair catching the last light of the day. Edward approached, his footsteps slow, as though he wasn't sure he was welcome in the moment. "She's different now," he said quietly. Maya glanced at him. "She's the same. You're just seeing her."
He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched his daughter spin in the grass, arms wide, the sound of her laughter drifting back to them. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "I don't want to miss it again." Dinner that evening was simple: roast chicken, fresh bread, a salad from the garden Clara had helped plant. The table was set with care, each plate in its place, a folded napkin resting neatly on top. Clara moved from chair to chair, adjusting them just so, humming the same tune she'd once sung in secret. After they ate, she disappeared into her room for a moment and returned holding something in her hands. "For you," she said, offering Maya a small silver locket. Maya opened it to find a pressed daisy inside, perfectly preserved between two glass panes. It was the first flower they had pressed together in the garden, the day Edward had told her the job was ending. "It's so you remember," Clara explained, "that we kept going." Maya felt her throat tighten. "I could never forget." Edward was silent, but his eyes lingered on the locket, then on his daughter. When Clara turned to him, he knelt down so they were eye level. "Are you proud of me now?" she asked softly. He drew in a breath and for once didn't look away. "More than you'll ever know." In that moment, the room seemed warmer, as if the light itself had leaned closer. Months later, when Maya spoke at a conference about the case, she ended her talk not with charts or data, but by holding up the small silver locket for the audience to see. "Sometimes," she said, "the most extraordinary treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to truly look. And when we stop trying to fix people, we may finally start to see them for who they've been all along." The applause that followed wasn't for her alone. It was for every hidden voice waiting to be heard.
Sometimes, the greatest harm doesn't come from open cruelty, but from the quiet moments when we fail to truly see someone. Clara's story reminds us that labels can be as limiting as locked doors, and that even love, when clouded by fear or pride, can keep the people we care about from reaching their full potential. In life, it's easy to accept what we've been told, a diagnosis, an opinion, a reputation. But wisdom often lies in looking again, listening more deeply, and being willing to challenge the truths we've grown comfortable with. As the saying goes, don't judge a book by its cover, but perhaps more importantly, don't stop reading after the first chapter. We all have the power to break harmful silences, to speak up when something feels unjust, and to offer understanding instead of assumptions. It takes courage to stand firm against prejudice, whether it's aimed at us or at someone we love. But it's in those moments of courage that change begins, not just for individuals, but for entire families and communities. Clara's breakthrough was not a miracle that happened overnight. It was the result of patience, respect, and someone who believed in her without condition. And in the end, it was that belief, not authority, not wealth, that transformed everything. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Have you ever seen someone's potential hidden by others' assumptions? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more powerful, thought-provoking stories like this one. May you carry with you the peace that comes from being truly seen and the hope that you can be that light for someone else.